Hello there, my name is Marcelo Almeida and I wanted to discuss with you 2 tips for better requirement spec. In my career, I've found several instances of requirements spec that didn't have a reference architecture listed or captured. That may lead to at least 2 problems. First, the requirements may get out of sync with the state of the architecture, and different persons, different team members may have different views of the architecture, right? So you better have that capture and harmonize it between all the team members. A second problem that I frequently find is that the requirement spec are not written taking the user into consideration. So those are the 2 problems that I frequently find in requirements spec, and I wanted to discuss with you how to address those problems and fix those. Discuss without further talks, let's get into my computer here and let's look into what we have to discuss. Let's discuss 2 tips for writing better specs and how you can make use of some concepts of system engineering to really improve your spec and your communication with the downstream design teams. So in here we're gonna quickly cover how the system concept and the system context and having the user experience in mind can help you write better specs. You strive to understand those concepts and how to apply them into your system spec. Those are the 2 tips. Subordinate your requirements to a reference architecture and always keep the spec consumer in mind. When you're talking about subordinating a requirements to a reference spec, I'm talking about making your architecture explicit, ensuring that everybody does have the same architecture in mind when working with your system. That is key, right? I'm pretty sure that you have an architecture in mind, but other team members may have a slightly different architecture in mind, and that may end up creating something that's not what is expected or even needed to deliver value to the customer. And that can be made through the use of an architecture description document. That document would be the system concept. It would guide implementation decisions. It will define system organization that allows the correct system properties and system functions to emerge. That system organization also drives your requirements organization. It defines system form, it allocates function to form, and it establishes functional and formal relationships, including the input operands, also known as inputs only, and the externally delivered value-related operands, or outputs. Here an example of how important architecture is. So 2 very simple systems on the right, 2 very different value-related functions. The upper right system is a low-pass filter. The lower right system is a high-pass filter. So you see that even though the components are the same, value-related function is totally different just because of the relations. So pay attention, define your relations, define integration. That is key. Integration is where the majority of the problems reside, and you need to pay attention to that aspect. Second, keep the spec consumer in mind. Let's look at some definitions first before I get into that point. So what a requirement is, in accordance with Bruce Powell in Agile System Engineer, a requirement is a statement of a necessary or expected system property, feature, characterization, or usage. In accordance with the INCO's System Engineering Handbook, it is a statement that identifies a system, product, or process characteristic or constraint which is unambiguous, clear, unique, consistent, standalone, verifiable, and is deemed necessary for stakeholder acceptability. Pretty similar definitions, right? But there is one thing that none of those definitions talk about, which is that a requirement is consumed by someone, and that someone will either implement a design to meet your requirement or will verify the implementation of that requirement. So 2 different users, 2 different points of view that does have 2 different views that do have to be considered when you're capturing a requirement, you need to strive to understand the users of your spec so that you write better spec. If you think about a requirement, then we can update that definition by saying, yes, it is a statement of a necessary characteristic or property. It is subordinate to an architecture, as we've discussed it before. It can have types. Here I'm giving you 3 examples: functional requirements, quality of service requirements, parametric requirements, and it defines system characteristics or properties necessary to deliver the expected value when a system is operated. It is something that guides downstream design or implementation. Therefore, it facilitates downstream handoff. When you are given the requirements for someone to implement, that someone needs to understand it. Make sure you understand who that someone is, what is their level of understanding of the system you're trying to specify. Talk to him and make sure that he understands the spec that you've delivered to him. Always have the spec user in mind. That is the tip. In addition to using general requirements engineering best practices that are around there, keep asking yourself 2 simple questions. Is this requirement sufficient and necessary for the next design level? Is this requirement understandable to the consumer of the spec? Investigate the answer to those questions and consider your spec finished only when you have satisfactory answers to both questions. So, from now on, you will strive to do 2 things. 1, understand your system context and concept before you start requirements definition. Maintain a constant focus on the consumers of your spec. Make everything explicit. Ensure that everybody in the team does share your understanding, and maintain constant focus on the consumer, on the user. Think about the user experience. If you want to read a little bit more about those concepts, you can research on the titles on the screen. Here is the reference for the photo.
So, how was that? Did you like it? So, let's continue the discussion. Leave your comments and let's keep this discussion going on. Thank you very much and see you in the next one.